What is up, hockey fans? Today I'm going to be recapping Day 4 of the Four Nations face-off happening in Boston, Massachusetts. So we'll hop into it today, starting with, of course, the scores from today's games. And we start here with a 5-3 victory for Canada over Finland. And this was a game, I mean, you know, you can see the Canada jerseys behind me. I've run out of excuses. And we're now 3 games in. All 3 games for Canada have been blown leads. Think back to the 2-0 and 3-1 lead against Sweden. Blew both of those leads. Against the U.S., where you had a 1-0 lead early. Blew that one. And out of the Finland game, where you're up 4 goals in a 4-0 hockey game, and you let yet another team crawl back into the game. And, you know, for Canada, they're lucky. And to be in this spot that they're in the finals, I have to say they are lucky. Because you looked at all these games and, frankly, they probably shouldn't have beat Sweden. And I think, honestly, they're lucky they did, because this very well could be a completely different standings group. It had Canada not beaten Sweden. And, you know, we'll talk about the standings in just a few minutes here. But for Canada, in a must-win, basically, game against the Finns, you almost let them back in. You remember coming into this one, it had to be in regulation. Otherwise, you let the potential of Sweden knocking you out. And very well, as we'll talk about in the next game here, it happened. And Sweden beat the U.S. in regulation. And you think how much more that game would have meant. I don't know. And so for Canada, they are lucky. They're lucky to be where they are. Yes, they took this game 5-3. Yes, they outplayed the Finland for 55 minutes of this game and then kind of let them back in at the very end. But a 4-0 lead should be enough to get you through. And for Finland, you know, they did exactly what they needed to here, I guess. You know, they kind of stuck around, and when Canada got sloppy, they put the puck in the back of the net 3 different times. So for Finland, you know, you think to their tournament, you lost basically your entire back end and your defensive core. And sure enough, they played well enough to very least have a shot to make the finals, had Canada blown one more goal. And who knows, maybe if that call went as icing, which, I don't know, maybe it should have been, that game might have been very different. So Canada takes this one 5-3. They do move on to the championship game, where they will play the U.S. on Thursday. More on that one to come. Let's talk about the second game of the day. And this is one coming into it where a lot of question marks, right? Where is the U.S. going to play this one through? They're already into the championship. Are they going to play their players? Are they going to rest them? And we kind of found out pretty quickly that it's a good thing they had it, right? Where you got guys like Tkachuk, and then, of course, both Tkachuks ended up getting hurt, depending on which way you want to look at it. They're probably going to get a lot more rest. Both of them are expected to play on Thursday against Canada. And this is kind of why this video is coming out a little bit later. Once again, I know I've been saying that a lot this week. And we're finally home after an 15-and-a-half-hour train ride home yesterday. But, you know, for this U.S. team, injuries are something to take note of, right? You have the 2 guys out. Matthews sat with, I think it was an illness, maybe, or a healthy scratch. I'm not entirely sure. But no Austin Matthews yesterday. You had no Matthew Tkachuk. Brady Tkachuk got hurt a couple minutes into the game. Then on the back end, you got Charlie McAvoy, who is now out for the tournament. And we'll talk about McAvoy in a couple minutes as well, given this is the Bruins channel. But it's a big loss, right? And it's one of those things that you don't take a note until you realize that, this U.S. team might be struggling a little bit. But time will tell, right? And Sweden played a great game. They earned their win. They did exactly what they needed to here. So for the Swedes, it's a good start. And unfortunately, for Sweden at this tournament, they had every chance to be able to make this championship game. You think to their game against Canada, where they lost in overtime after crawling back 2 goals down, and you think, or twice rather, 2 goals down, right? And you think to the game against the Finns, where they just kind of let it slip away, and they win any one of those games, they're in that championship game instead of Canada. Very well could be a different tournament if they win that game. So for the Swedes, unfortunately, they just kind of got messed up by the structure of this tournament. They're now out. U.S. Canada will be your final on Thursday. But now to the news, and for Canada, we start here with the lead problem. And for Canada, they just seem to be wanting to lose leads. And it's great to have a lead in hockey. It's another thing to keep it. And we've seen time after time in this tournament, a very struggling issue for them is holding on to that lead. And you think to the team that they're going to be coming up against on Thursday for the championship, it's going to be Canada, it's going to be the U.S. in a hostile TD Garden, and you're going to have to bring it. And I just don't know if they're going to be able to, because the teams they've played at this tournament, the offensive firepower just does not match what you're going to see from the U.S. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be, right? I don't know if it's going to be Canada, you know, coming out and blowing the U.S. out of the water, because they've looked so good, especially early on in games. They come out flying out of the gates every single time, and then it just seems like they try and play defense, and it doesn't work. So are we going to see a Canadian team come out and play their game for the full 60? I don't know what's not working, and I don't know if it's the structure they're trying to play with. I don't know if it's allowing too many shots on Jordan Binnington. I don't know. And then, of course, the goaltending problem. Binnington, I don't know. It's got to the point now where I can't tell if this is a goaltending problem, or if this is just a team structural problem, or if this is a coaching problem, or if this is a player composition problem. And we're just at that point where now it's time to put up or shut up, and we'll see which Canadian team comes out on Thursday, because it's going to be a big game. It's going to be a very anticipated game, and I'm very interested to see which Canadian team comes out to play. And then we move on here to Finland. That's too little too late. As obviously, you know, the Finns tried to claw back at the very end of this game, and very well could have won this game, I have to say. As much as, you know, Canada goes up 4-0, it seems like the game can be turned off. All of a sudden, 3 quick ones. And Finland's right there on the doorstep, potentially knocking Canada out of the tournament. And, you know, Finland, not expected to do anything at this tournament, finds a way to beat Sweden. You know, they get blown out by the U.S. on the opening night, find a way to claw back against Sweden. And then they play against Canada and nearly knock off Canada, forcing this game to overtime. And eventually, who knows, they win that game. The U.S. might play for it. And all of a sudden, you know, we could have a U.S.-Finland final. And so as much as for Finland here, not what they were hoping for, still, you know, just a little bit late, too little, and a little bit too late, you know, 1 goal difference. Very well could have turned the tide on this one. So for Finland, you know, great tournament for them. I think much better than people were anticipating, and just unfortunately came up a little short against Canada here for this game. Third one we go to is the bug for the U.S., which of course, you know, you sit Hellebuck, you sit Matthews, you sit Tkachuk's out with, I think it's an injury. He's expected to play Thursday. Brady Tkachuk goes down with injury. And the question just gets raised, right, is what's to come for this U.S. team. You know, you have Quinn Hughes now, which Coach Mike Sullivan was saying earlier today that he's ready to go. What happens there? Do you know, pull out the healthy scratch or the injury to a guy like Jake Sanderson or Noah Hannafin? Do you find a way to get Quinn Hughes into the lineup? You know, what sort of is the process there? Because very similar to Thomas Hartley problem with Canada when Makar went down, is are you able to play him or are you not? And, you know, I think for the U.S. especially, you might want a guy like Quinn Hughes when you're going up against a star-studded team like Canada, where that extra little defense might be needed. And I'm curious to see, because without Charlie McAvoy, that's a big hole to fill. I'll be curious to see if they do try and find a way to stick a guy like Quinn Hughes into the lineup. So something to keep an eye on there. If there's any injuries coming out over the next 24-ish hours before game time here from the TD Garden. So something to keep an eye on there as well. For Sweden, they were eliminated before their game even started. Same with Finland. So we'll see, of course, Canada and U.S. rivalry game once again, which will be interesting. But now we will talk about the Bruins. So it's our Bruins segment where we talk only about the Bruins. So we start here with Brad Marchand. No goals, no assists, no shots on goal, a -1. and 14 minutes and 13 seconds time on ice. And I have to say, in this game, Marchand played a lot more than he normally has, and I thought he looked decent enough to keep him out there. Not what he was hoping for, I think, especially in terms of offensive production, but he had a couple looks and just unfortunately couldn't finish it. So for Marchand, he's not going to be that guy that kind of pops off the stat sheet. He's not going to be the guy that you're going to be like, okay, I think he's going to be the next one. I just think that for Marchand, keeping his game steady is going to be the trick, getting under the opponent's skin. And we think back to their last U.S. game, right, where I think he was 8 minutes, I want to say 8-9 minutes of ice time. You're going to see, in my eyes, a much more elevated role, especially when you have him in Boston. He's played on the big moments. He's played in that building. You're going to need him if you're Canada in order to beat a team like the U.S., where it's going to be a chippy game, where Marchand typically thrives. Something to keep an eye on there for Canada, especially just monitoring his ice time. I think you're going to see a lot more of him compared to, the rest of this tournament, where he's sort of been shielded a little bit more. But this game especially kind of shows the trust that Coach Jon Cooper has in him. And we'll see if that continues into the rest of this series. So that's Canada. Finland, no players from Boston. We'll now talk about Sweden and the U.S. So with Sweden, Elias Lindholm, no goals, no assists, no shots on goal, a -1 with 17 minutes and 34 seconds of ice time. The most amount of minutes that Elias Lindholm has played at this tournament. And part of that was, of course, that Sweden was looking for their defensive players to step up in this game. And, you lose Mika Zibanejad to, I think it was the illness too. And, this, obviously the illness is kind of running rampage through this tournament, especially, but especially for Sweden throughout the lineup. And when we look at sort of what Sweden needs to do this entire game, it was defend. And for Sweden, it was, what are you going to be able to do, right? It's going to be, are you going to play your defensive game? And they go up relatively early in this one, right? 2-1. And all of a sudden, for Sweden, it's just hold on for dear life. And at the end of the day, their defensive players came through, and Elias Lindholm was probably one of their better ones at doing that. And especially when it comes to defensive end zone draws and whatnot. And overall, I will say Lindholm's game wasn't terribly great in this game. He had a bad penalty. He let in a goal. It's not the game he wants. But still, he's a player that you're going to put out there to rack up those defensive minutes and provide that sort of shutdown center role, which in my eyes he did just fine in this game. So for Sweden, for Elias Lindholm, obviously it's their last game of the tournament. But in my eyes, the 17 minutes and 34 seconds was what you wanted to see from him, especially as the Bruins fan. You wanted to see that out of him, to see if he's going to continue that into the season. Yes, he took a bad penalty. Yes, he let in the goal on his line, but it's not the end of the day for this Bruins team. So I think, for the Bruins, it's a good sign that Lindholm's playing this much in that role, in that shutdown play, and he looked decent enough to stay out there doing it. But at the end of the day, still, you're looking for him for a little bit more production than that. And, you're playing against some of the better players, or you're playing with some of the better players were in the world, right? And in my eyes, you're just looking for that little bit more from him to really put his game over the edge. But that's for Sweden. As for the U.S., Charlie McAvoy was injured. He is now week to week, as was reported by Jim McBride. So, once again, not what you are hoping for if you're the Bruins. And, of course, this is one of the caveats of this tournament, right, is what's going to come in terms of the injury report. And McAvoy, unfortunately, was the one player that is going to get one of the many players at this tournament who's going to come back out of the break banged up. So for the U.S., it's a very big loss playing against Canada on Thursday. For the Bruins, it's a bigger loss because obviously you're a team that's looking to make a push here, especially with the trade deadline right around the corner. Those are the kind of moments you need to find that kind of groove. And unfortunately for Team USA, not what you're looking for when you're coming up against a tough opponent in Canada and the offensive firepower that comes with it. You want a shutdown guy like Charlie McAvoy who we even saw it in that last game. Yes, he got burned on first or second shift, but then the rest of the game, playing that physicality, playing that sort of shutdown role that you're so used to seeing from him, that's what you're going to be missing if you're the U.S. And unfortunately, week to week out for the tournament, so we won't be seeing any more of him. As for Jeremy Swayman, he sat on the bench yesterday at TD Garden, so at least he got close to ice level with Connor Hellebuck sitting up in the stands with a healthy scratch. So for Team USA, you're going to roll with the hot goaltender, and that's Connor Hellebuck. You know, you got Ottinger coming behind him. Look for that in the championship game on Thursday. So with all that being said, let's move to the championship game and talk about that one coming up on February 20th. That is Thursday, February 20th. We will have Neil Simmons from Black and Gold Productions covering that game, so be sure to toss him a follow at nsims on Twitter. And that game is coming up at 8 p.m., and it's going to be a good one, right? Canada-USA, is there really any more you can ask for in a championship game? With everything that's going on, it's going to be a good one. And we got to that point, of course, with the standings. USA in first with 6 points, 2 regulation wins, and the regulation loss. Canada with 5 points. Sweden also with 5 points. But remember, because of the tiebreaker, because Canada beat Sweden back on Wednesday, that is the reason for the Canada being above Sweden. It's because of that tiebreaker. And then, of course, Finland in last place in just an unfortunate tournament, right, where Finland kind of just fell out of the loop, and Sweden, unfortunately, just couldn't win the game they needed to, losing twice in overtime in both games that they honestly probably should have won. And we talked about it in that one-day recap, right, or day one recap, where we sort of talked about how that loss is going to cost you at a tournament like this. And yes, in the long run, Sweden beat the U.S. and everything kind of worked out that way, but very well, you know, Sweden beats Finland, and this tournament is going to be turning a lot different very quickly. So, or if that matter, Sweden beat Canada, tournament could have changed very quickly. So that's sort of how we got to this point, U.S.-Canada, but very well. And this is one of the beautiful parts about any kind of international hockey and the way that they run these standings is every game matters. And whether you win it or lose it in overtime, it matters. And if the game goes to overtime, it matters. And we sort of saw that with the Swedes, right? Where you'd much rather, you know, win a game in regulation than win a game in overtime. And unfortunately, and same thing with Finland, right? Where they had the opportunity here to force it, and fortunately they just couldn't. So for these two teams, or for basically all four of these teams, it's always the one game that matters in this tournament. And for Sweden, the one game that mattered was, you know, of course, the Finland game, and they couldn't pull it off. And for Finland, the one game that mattered was the Canada game, and they fell just short. And for Canada, the one game that mattered was the one that's coming on Thursday, and they're lucky enough to be able to get by. And of course, for the U.S., they've only had one game that matters, and it's going to be the Thursday one as well. So we'll see which teams come out to play, because it's going to be a good one. For Canada, Makar's should be back. You should be seeing both Kachucks back. They were, Brady went down the tunnel after running into a post. He should be okay. McAvoy's out. Quinn Hughes is a maybe. I've been trying to push this video as long as possible. Based on what we've been hearing, I don't expect anyone to go down with the illness, but you really never know in this tournament, because in the snap of a finger, everything can change. So something to keep an eye on there. But with that, remember, Thursday championship game, Neil Simmons will be covering it. We will be having our day recap after that, and that'll be it. And that'll be the end of the Four Nations. We'll be heading back to the Bruins coverage as always. But first, before we wrap up today's video, we're going to do our live question segment. If you have not already, be sure to follow me at ParkerMcLean15 on Twitter, where we post a daily poll asking for your thoughts and questions after the day. Today, we have one question from Tweeter9123, who says, if Marner continues to, in brackets, largely a non-factor on Thursday, how much is that going to affect his contract negotiations with the Leafs? And it's a good question, but I don't think it will be too much. Obviously, it sort of speaks to his ability to play in the big games and whatnot. But in the actual long run, I think it's all going to matter based on what he does in the playoffs this year. I think that's going to be a more it'll be more of a factor in terms of his contract negotiations. So for the Leafs, you know, they might look at Four Nations and say, hey, you blew the bet here, but if you blow the bet in the playoffs, that's what's going to matter more. If you play really well in the playoffs, you're going to look at that. In the Four Nations tournament, where it still basically is an all-star game where you can say, hey, as much as, you know, you want me to believe this is the reason, I don't think it's going to have as much of a factor on his contract. I think if you're looking ahead to something like the Olympics, that might be where, you know, a selection process team might be looking at and saying, hey, this guy can't play in the big moments. Maybe we don't go after him. So in my eyes, it's more about the Olympics and the upcoming tournaments rather than the contracts. I don't think they'll take a real look at the contract. You know, I think to guys like Kucherov, who didn't really give it their all during the All-Star break, they're not going to take that kind of hit on him because it doesn't reflect his play. But it might reflect, you know, potential teams that want to select him in the Olympics or future Four Nations or World Cup teams. I think that'll be where you'll see that kind of impact. But that is it for the live questions. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you really like, consider subscribing. Tell all your friends to comment down below your thoughts on Day 4 of the Four Nations Face-Off. Until next time, see you.